Dr. Shelley Ball, welcome to the Tick Boot Camp podcast.
Thank you very much, Rich.
We're really excited, and I have an exciting note for our folks today. I am co-hosting without Matt Sabatello, and I know everybody's happy about that. I have the brilliant Aimee Packer with me today. So Aimee, say hi to the folks.
Hey, guys.
So, folks, I know you remember Aimee from her podcast interview. It was actually one of the most downloaded interviews we've ever had, and now we've asked Aimee to come on this side of the microphone with us so we can interview the brilliant Dr. Shelley Ball. So, Dr. Ball, why don't you first give us some background? And I do want to let folks know that you are one of the kind North Americans. We always love to have our Canadian folks on because you're all so nice, not cranky like the New Yorkers that we sometimes interview, like me and Matt. So thank you for being kind enough to join us and bring some joy to our community.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So tell us first of all, what part of Canada you are currently residing in, and talk to us about where you grew up.
So I currently reside in Eastern Ontario. I don't know if you're familiar with the nation's capital in Ottawa, Ontario. And so I'm probably about an hour and a bit southwest of Ottawa. I live rurally, so I'm on 15 acres, Canadian Shield country, so lots of rock and trees and all beautiful area. For folks who know Ontario a little bit better, I'm between Ottawa and Kingston, and I'm right smack dab in the middle of a Lyme hotspot in Eastern Ontario. Lucky me.
Sadly, Dr. Ball, I think we're all in the middle of
we are
hot spot.
aren't we?
during my childhood, actually, I'm so old and I've been getting bitten by ticks for so long, our guests know, that I predate the discovery, at least the alleged discovery, of the Lyme bacteria. We were most concerned about Rocky Mountain spotted fever during my childhood, but we were always being bitten by ticks. And of course, then the Lyme outbreak became very, very well known in New York. So I've always been there, but now I don't think anyone in North America can escape being in a Lyme hotspot. It really is endemic, right? So was that true of your childhood, Dr. Ball, or were you later introduced to ticks and tick diseases?
Yeah, the interesting question. So I grew up in Ottawa, so not too far from where I live now. And the reason why I live where I do is because we had a family cottage just on the other side of Westport, Ontario. So that's kind of my nearest community. I'm between Perth and Westport, Ontario. And I fell in love with this place. I mean, I actually became a biologist because of the beauty of this area. So yeah, I spent my entire childhood between romping around the fields around home in Ottawa, and then up at the cottage here, around Westport. I spent my entire childhood romping around, forest and meadows and outdoors. I sort of joke that I popped out of my mom's womb as a biologist, right? I was 2 years old and I'd come in and go, Mom, I need a jar, because I had some sort of insect in my hand. And so, you could sort of argue that, wow, talk about maybe a higher risk lifestyle and even childhood, because I spent every waking moment outside. But I never saw a tick. The first time I saw a tick was as a PhD student. So I'm Canadian, but I did my undergrad, my master's here in Canada, and then I went to the US for my PhD, University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri. And while I was a PhD student in the second half of the 90s, I was really, really fortunate to get accepted to a program called OTS, Organization for Tropical Studies. And as an ecologist, so I'm a former university professor, research scientist, and my area is evolutionary ecology and population genetics of insects. And so I was lucky enough as an ecologist to get accepted to this 2-month field program in Costa Rica, Central America. And so trying to think now, I think we were gone for 3 months. And we traveled around, keeping in mind this is all biologists, right? All biology graduate students. So it was about 22 of us traveling around Costa Rica for 3 months or whatever, studying field ecology at, we were probably at about 8 different locations across country. And I don't know if you've been to Central America, but it's tick heaven. And it was really common for us to say brush up against a leaf, of some tropical plant. And I don't even know to this day what the technical name is for it is, but we used to call it a seed tick ball. So basically there'd be a little ball of ticks hanging on the very tip of the leaf. Some mammal, us, would brush up against it. And next thing you know, you've got 300 little baby ticks scrambling all over you. So we always carried duct tape with us. We always had a roll of duct tape, and we literally use it like, like a lint brush kind of thing, right? To get the ticks off us. Never thought anything of it. I mean, not for a nanosecond back then in the 90s did I ever think about what these things were carrying, or even if I was bitten. And then I was at the very end of the 3 months, and we had just spent, I think, about 10 days in the lowland tropical rainforest. And we're talking like the most humid place I've ever been. And it was about a 20-kilometer hike out from the field station to civilization we were going. And I'm like, what the heck is this? I'm wearing a pair of shorts, and I feel this bump on my thigh, and I'm like, oh man, what's that? Pull it off. It's a fully engorged tick. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Throw it away. Honest to God, Rich, I never, even as a biologist, I never ever thought for a nanosecond about whether or not that tick was carrying anything. And then I never thought about ticks ever again until 2019, when I was bitten here in Eastern Ontario. And that's when my life changed.
Okay, so let's pause there for a second, and walk back a little bit to the baby who was born to be a biologist, who was running around the wilds of Canada and then in Central and South America, and quite frankly, surprisingly, despite being educated at the highest levels at some of the top universities in the world, you knew nothing about tick diseases and the risks associated with having hundreds of sea ticks on you at times when you were doing your field work.
Yeah.
I mean, give me your reaction to that, Dr. Ball, that you're one of the most educated people in the world, with a very specific discipline, biology. You were doing fellowship type work, with insects and coming in contact with ticks, yet no one prepared you to keep yourself safe when coming in contact with these vectors.
Yeah, not even for a nanosecond. And it's really wild, because when I think back of my first trip to Costa Rica, which was towards the end of the last year of my undergrad degree, I guess it was. And it's interesting because preparing, so this would have been the late 80s, preparing to go to Costa Rica, you get a typhoid shot, you get a hepatitis C shot, right? You try to figure out, well, do we need to take an anti-malaria medication? Well, at that point, there were no kind of endemic cases of malaria in Costa Rica. There were a few that were in the country, but they were actually from people coming mostly from Nicaragua. So the risk of malaria was really low. So you hear about all of these like tropical diseases and other things that you need to worry about. Anybody ever talk about a tick-borne disease? Absolutely not. And certainly not in North America. I honestly, I mean, it is kind of shocking when I look back on it, but we, as a biologist, you think about all the things that you can get, bitten by or infected from and all that sort of thing. The big thing when I was in Costa Rica were bot flies. And I know this is kind of crazy, but as biologists, and not every biologist would say this, but as a evolutionary ecologist and population geneticist for insects, we used to have this kind of running joke that we wanted to get bitten by a bot fly because we actually wanted to grow the bot fly in our skin just to see what the process was like. And people would go, are you nuts? And I'm like, yeah, well, inquiring minds want to know, right? So this was the kind of stuff that we were focused on. Never even thought that a tick would be biting us, let alone that it would be a vector. And it just never even crossed our mind. And here's the frightening thing is I look back on the number of field biologist colleagues that I have, some younger than me, most older than me, and most of them have Lyme disease, and some of them have had some pretty nasty diseases like Parkinson's and other things. And you look at those and you say, well, where did the Parkinson's come from? And I don't have any proof, but it just breaks my heart because I think probably undiagnosed Lyme disease, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm really surprised about, if truth be told, is you're a PhD and you were exposed to all of the cutting edge information about these vectors, and you knew nothing about it. And I can tell you, just as a practical matter, as a kid growing up in the 60s and 70s, we were very aware of ticks. We were doing tick checks every day when we walked in our house. We had what we call a janky tick kit, where we had a vat of Vaseline and a tweezer and napkins and matches. And every day when our dogs came into the house, we checked them. And every day when we walked into the house, my mother made us do tick checks. I mean,
Really, in the 70s.
that's where we were. And in the late 60s and the 70s, I didn't graduate from high school until 1981, and we were doing that long before I graduated from high school. So, we had sort of.
I was a kid in the 70s, and we never even thought of this stuff.
It's shocking to me that the scientific community was so far behind the cultural community, at least in New York at the time, where we were taking, and our parents were helping us to take steps to be as safe as we could be from these vectors. And you're being educated at literally the highest levels. They're running you into ticks, and you have no information at all about how to keep yourself safe, right? And one of the arguments I've made on this podcast is the reason I believe I do not have chronic Lyme disease, despite having bitten by ticks scores and scores of times over my life, is because we were so tick aware, and every day of my life, including my adult life, I check myself for ticks. So again, one of the things our listeners know painfully well, is that Lyme disease is a disease of exposure, right? And with a proper education and with taking proper steps, you can protect yourself from getting Lyme disease. And then, of course, you can also protect your children from the downstream effects, the way, unfortunately, because Aimee wasn't educated, she wasn't able to protect her baby from getting congenital Lyme disease, right? So it's always shocking to me, and again, I don't want to run on about this too long, because I'm sure our listeners are rolling their eyes now because they hear me do this all the time. But I'm just shocked that somebody at your level of education and with your capacity and your interest, I mean, you were, again, born to be a biologist. You were rolling around the woods from when you could walk all the way until probably yesterday, right? And you didn't have the tools you needed to stay safe.
And part of it too is we just, like even here in Eastern Ontario, we never saw ticks back then. It's interesting because, I mean, we had outdoor cats when I was a little kid. I was a kid in the 70s, and, kitty go outside, come back in, never saw a tick. We never had dogs growing up. I think we'd probably see a tick, like on the ear of a rabbit that hopped by at the cottage or something, or maybe deer. But we just never saw ticks. It was a whole different world than what we're in right now. And kind of just to sort of close the loop on this, here's what's even more shocking. So I belong to a local women's group. It's actually a national women's group here in Canada. And so I'm chairing the environment committee for our local chapter. And back in 2018, when I was first chair of the environment committee, we were responsible for organizing kind of the monthly speaker or whatever for April, which is Environment Month. And I decided to do a session on Lyme disease because we're hearing more and more about it. So I had a local resident whose daughter had literally been crippled from undiagnosed Lyme disease. We had a veterinarian, and we had somebody from public health. And I thought, because of Lyme disease, and remember, this is 2018, so this is before my own Lyme nightmare started. And I just thought, with Lyme on the increase, we really, really need to make people aware of Lyme disease and these issues and how to prevent an infection. And, I had heard what public health was telling us, and I just thought, well, let's get some really good information. I cringe now, Rich, because I look back on that presentation that was given by public health, and I don't say this with any malicious intent. I'm just, recounting a story. And I just cringe because I now know everything that they told us was incorrect. And I think part of that is a little bit of a motivation for why I'm just so active in terms of Lyme advocacy, because I've realized how, first of all, it led to my own almost dying from tick-borne illnesses. And now that Lyme and other tick-borne illnesses, I'm not even going to say Lyme, just tick-borne diseases, because we've got 3 of them around here that are equally prevalent and can make you really, really sick. And I just, I cringe when I think about, that session in 2018. And I really want to make people aware of the current information, the current science on Lyme as much as possible, and other tick-borne diseases, so they can stay safe. That's what I care about.
Right, and also talk about one more piece with us before we build out your health history leading up
Yeah.
to the your tick bite in 2019. Um, you're an avid outdoors person, right? I mean, you understand the importance that nature plays in our lives and how important it is for us to have a relationship with the outdoors, how important it is for us to be healthy when having a relationship with the outdoors. So talk about that element of your passion and how we have to strike the balance between
Mhm.
having a healthy relationship with nature, enjoying the outdoors, but also being safe at the same time.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I think it's an extremely important one. And it's certainly one that's kind of at the root of the core of my passion. So I'm a biologist. I'm, an outdoor enthusiast. I spend all of my time outdoors. I also have, it's not my full-time job, but I do have my own environmental education organization that I started. And the whole purpose of that organization, which I started in 2016, is to connect people to nature and to inspire them to care about nature and to protect it, right? Because we sure need that these days with climate change and all of the issues going on. And so it's also a way for me to kind of promote the outdoors and people connecting to nature. And and so what's really frightening is, I've been through this horrible experience myself, and yet I still want people to go outside and enjoy nature. And I'm very adamant about that. I'm very adamant about saying to people, do not hide indoors. It's not okay. Like it's not going to solve anything. What we need to do, unfortunately, is find a way to live with the current situation, find ways to mitigate the risk as much as possible. How do we get outdoors, enjoy nature, connect with nature? Because we know we get so many benefits from it, physical, psychological, right? So how do we still get outdoors and enjoy nature, but do it as safely as possible? And so that's a really, really big focus of what I do as well.
Let's narrow the focus a little bit more and focus on people who are chronically ill, people who are suffering from Lyme disease, and the fears that are natural when you have Lyme disease about now going outdoors. Right? We've had
Mm-hmm.
guest after guest after guest on this podcast that have taken the position that they've walked themselves to health. They were able to regain their health as a result of having a healthy relationship with the outdoors. In
Mm-hmm.
some cases, it's earthing or grounding, depending on your description of having having your neurological system reset by coming in contact with the earth. Folks who talk about the benefits of detoxing, not just by moving, but by having fresh air, and
Mm-hmm.
we know all about the problems with not having fresh air after our COVID experience, right? And unfortunately, so many people in the Lyme community, when they're chronically ill, become shut-ins because they're afraid to come in contact with ticks. So I'm going to ask you, Dr. Ball, to narrow your focus and talk about the importance of people who are sick with Lyme disease to to get out into the outdoors as part of their healing journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've raised a really important point there, Rich, because I do believe it's part of our healing. I think kind of locking ourselves in our homes doesn't benefit us in any way. And ticks aside, I mean, with COVID, we've kind of been forced to do that, for a while. And I think we've seen the negative impacts that kind of isolation and lack of outdoor activity and all sorts of things, lack of, social interactions has. So yeah, I think it's really important to get outside, whether it's the exercise, enjoying nature, meeting somebody at the local park for coffee or whatever. But I also really empathize with folks who are struggling with that, because I went through it myself, and I'm a biologist. I've lived my whole life outdoors, basically. And it was, you get to the point where you're like, I don't want to go outside. Oh my goodness, am I going to get bitten by another tick? And that's what really led me to really start to think about Lyme disease and tick-borne illnesses. So there are kind of two parts to this. One is I'm not getting help from the medical system, so I need to read the science so I can help myself. But then the other part of it was, what are the preventative measures that I can take so I can go back outside? Because I'm going crazy here. I'm going squirrely. I cannot stay inside. And I was almost kind of becoming resentful of this feeling of, frankly, terror about going outside and being bitten. I mean, I would see a tick and I just, it would almost send me into a rage. because I thought, you've messed up my entire life. And there was a lot of anger and bitterness that I had to get over. And it sounds hilarious in one way, you're kind of angry and bitter towards this little speck of an invertebrate, but it changes your life. It turns your life upside down. And so, I think like many people, it was kind of a process that I had to go through. And I had to kind of almost sit myself down and say, look, you love being outdoors. You have this passion for nature. I mean, I've always said to people, I can't survive without nature. I need to be outside in order to be healthy and just to feel alive and vibrant. And so that's when I really got busy kind of researching, okay, well, how can I get out there and enjoy the outdoors and do it safely? So I started to look at, things like, what are the various repellents and things, things I talk about in the book, come in and do your tick checks, do multiple tick checks a day, have your shower, put your clothes in the dryer, all of these things, right? And I think kind of where I've landed now is that if you develop these new habits, there's no guarantees in life, right? Every time we get in the car, we take a risk. So there's no guarantees. But I think by adopting certain habits, we can mitigate that risk. We can reduce it to a large extent, that we can still go outside and have fun and do the activities that we love to do, because I don't think we should be hiding inside.
So talk to us about what your health was like between the time that you had gotten bitten, that you were aware of being bitten. And I would argue you were probably bitten during your childhood and didn't know it, but I don't necessarily want to debate with you about that. But the first time you became aware of having been bitten was when you had the ticks that were crawling on you when you were doing your fellowship, and when you found that engorged tick on your back. So talk to us about how your health was around that time and thereafter up till 2019.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think I would love to circle back with hey, I think you've had Lyme since you were a kid, because that's my conclusion. I have 3 autoimmune diseases, and the first one hit when I was 25. And so, it did that kind of, was Lyme sort of priming the pump for these autoimmune diseases? And I think that's, it's a whole other discussion. In terms of my health, I mean, it's interesting because if you read Bill Rawls' book, Unlocking Lyme, I think he does a fabulous job of talking about the pot boiling over, right? So you get, we all have multiple infections, whether it's Epstein-Barr virus or, whatever, right? We carry all of these microbes that we probably don't even know about. And cumulatively, they can make you sick. But most of the time, your immune system is pretty good at keeping things in balance, right? And so, but I had been through a really, really tough time. I moved back to Canada in 2009. I'd been a research scientist in New Zealand for 6 years. Actually switched careers. So I left my academic career, came back home. So did an international move, bought a house. I had kind of switched careers for very personal reasons. And part of it was to come back home to be with family, and especially my mom, who was my best friend and frankly, my soulmate, and her health was declining. 3 months after I moved back to Canada in May of 2009, my mom became ill, and she ended up in hospital, and she ended up on life support. She was actually on life support twice in 15 months. And it was just brutal. It was the most horrendous thing that my mom had to go through. So that was really, really stressful. And then my common law husband at the time came from New Zealand, so trying to get him adjusted. My first day of work in my new job, the work that I do now, my very first day at work was a day that my mom had surgery, and then she went into septic shock and under life support 12 hours later. So, I kind of had in some ways the perfect storm of life crises. And we know how that affects our immune system when we're that stressed. And then, I'm not trying to say this as a, poor me story, because that's not what I want here. But I literally had a life crisis every year for 12 years. And so, after 2 stints on life support and 3 times me having to decide whether or not my mom lived or not, she passed away. And then my dad became ill, and then there were issues there. And then I went through a divorce and, settling my dad's estate. And then I lost my eyesight due to cataracts when I was 51, and I live alone. And, and it was literally disaster after disaster after disaster. And then in 2021, I had water damage. I had an unknown leak in my house because of a incorrectly installed plumbing. little did I know I had black mold growing in under my hardwood flooring. And one day I wake up and all of a sudden my hardwood flooring is, like a tent 12 inches off the ground, off this concrete slab. I'm like, what is going on? And I'd been kind of getting sicker and sicker. My point is that I had literally had a mountain of life stresses leading up to my bite in 2019. But what's really interesting was, so I went through a divorce in 2015. And that summer, I was out, playing in the garden, whatever, wearing shorts. The only thing I wear in summer are shorts and t-shirts. The only thing, my only wardrobe. And I'm sitting there on the back porch and I'm looking at my leg going, what's this round oval? And the first thing I thought, I hadn't seen a tick in my backyard, but I thought, could that be a tick bite? Is this Lyme disease? And then I get on the internet and I go, oh no, it's not Lyme disease because it's not a bullseye. This is me in 2015, right? As a biologist, as an educated person. So I'm like, no, I'm fine. Spider bite, right? Didn't think another thing of it. And then in 2016, as I say, I lost my eyesight to cataracts, and it came really quickly. And I was only like 51 at the time, so really young. So had cataract surgery, got my eyesight back. But I just started feeling sicker and sicker and sicker until kind of almost 2018. And my GP had said, I think it's just burnout. You've been kind of to hell and back with life in terms of all these life crises, family issues, all this sort of stuff. And so I think it's that, and your age and perimenopause and all of these things have just kind of come together. And then in 2018, I had a concussion. And that was really bad. It took me about a year to get past those symptoms, post-concussion symptoms. And that was in the spring of 2018. And so it took me a long time. I'm finally starting to feel a little bit better. And then boom, spring of 2019 is the tick bite that just about killed me.
Okay. So let's stay with the 2019 window, and then Aimee's going to take you through your diagnosis. So it sounds to me, and I wasn't counting, but there were a score of tick bites that you had during the course of your life, some of which you believe may have even predated your ability to recognize that you were bitten by ticks. But even after you graduated from university, you were a graduate student. From that point forward, there were a score of tick bites that you had suffered, but you were healthy enough to manage the microbes that you were harboring. There seem to be diagnoses of various types of autoimmune diseases, likely caused by the microbes that you were harboring from your various tick bites. But then in 2019, everything changes, right? And you're clearly a resilient person. You had crisis after crisis after crisis over the course of 12 years, tick bite after tick bite after tick bite, but you're functioning at a high level. You're working full time. You're taking care of everybody. You're fine, and then you're not, right? 2019 makes a difference. You get another tick bite, and so how did you discover that tick bite, and how did the symptomology change after that tick bite?
Yeah, really interesting. So late April 2019, as I say, I live on 15 acres of forested land, always outside playing, breaking leaves, whatever. And come inside this one day and I'm having a shower, and I live alone, and I'm kind of like, what's on my back? Of course, I can't see it, right? And then I got at this kind of makeup mirror, whatever, and I go, oh my goodness, is that a tick? It was the size of a pea. It was fully engorged, and we figure it was probably on me for about 10 days. It was huge. So it was probably just, like a day or two away from falling off. And, it was so engorged. And I went, oh man, what am I going to do about this? So I call my friend, right? What do? You phone a friend. I'm like, can you come take this like big honking tick off my back? Because I was frankly kind of panicked about it. And I don't panic easily, but I was like, oh my goodness, Lyme disease, fully engorged tick. And so my friend was out of town, and I'm like, like, okay, what am I going to do? Okay, I got to get this thing off me. So I went to my local hospital in a small town and asked them to take the tick off. So they did. And I brought a vial with me because I said, could you please test this? And they're like, no, we can't test it. Well, actually they can, they just choose not to, which I think is really lousy. But anyways, I didn't know about tick testing then. So I said, well, give me the tick anyways. And I actually gave it to our local veterinarian because they were part of a testing program. It's supposed to be ticks coming off of your cats or dogs that they test. It goes into a provincial database. So you don't actually get a result back for your own tick. It just goes towards, looking at the prevalence of say, Lyme disease and whatever in Ontario. So I couldn't get the thing tested because I didn't know that there was testing available. I didn't know anything about Lyme disease and tick-borne diseases back then. And so the ER doctor had said to me, yeah, you'll be fine. So here's 2 pills of doxycycline antibiotic, and take this 1 dose, you'll be fine. I trusted them. I was like, I'm not a medical doctor. These guys know what they're doing. So I thought, and I took the dose, came home. Okay, fine. And 3 days later, I came down with flu-like symptoms. And I was like, what is going on? And yeah, I was just like, I had connected the dots, but I was like, really? So quickly? Because they talk about up to 30 days, that first 30 days where you might have symptoms. Honest to God, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck 3 days later. I'm like, oh my goodness. So I was talking to a friend of mine who already had not just Lyme disease, but also Bartonella and Babesia. And she said, okay, Shell, here's the thing you need to do. First thing is you write down the date of your tick bite. Second thing you do is you keep a symptom tracker. Every day you write down your symptoms and how you're feeling. And so I started to do that. And then I was like, is this Lyme disease or is it not? I thought, you know what? I'm really burnt out. I've been to hell and back in the past, 11 years or whatever at this point, from life crises. I'm just really tired. My immune system's run down. And then I ended up getting a cold. I kind of ignored it. And then I got a cold. And I was like, okay, well, clearly it's just my immune system's shot from stress, run down. I get over the cold, and then seasonal allergies hit. And I used to have seasonal allergies when I was a kid, but I'd never had anything this bad for like decades. And I was like, oh my God, I'm just being hammered by seasonal allergies. So I finally, we at this point, we're kind of at the beginning of, I guess kind of end of May. And then I just got sick. I just literally, it was like I was hit by a truck. So I got over the cold, I got over the allergies, those symptoms went away. And then I woke up one morning and I couldn't get out of bed because every joint in my body was aching. I had a headache, I had nausea, I just felt horrible, I felt feverish. I couldn't breathe, like I felt like I just couldn't get a full breath. And I'm like, oh my God, this is awful. Took the day off work. So I rested for the weekend, and then Monday came, I went back to work. I'm like, oh, okay. And then boom, Tuesday, it was even worse. I couldn't even get off the couch. And that's when I phoned my GP and booked an appointment. And that was the start of a heck of a journey.
So Aimee's going to take you through the rest of your diagnostic journey, but I do want to walk back to one more piece before Aimee takes you through the rest of this part of your journey. And that is, you had a tick on your back. It was an engorged tick and was on you for a while. And one of the things that we focus here on Tick Bootcamp is learning the lessons in retrospect that maybe folks wouldn't be aware of. If you had to do it again, would you have waited to go to the doctor to get that tick off your back? Or would you have done anything you could, reach behind, run to your next door neighbor, whatever you had to do to grab that tick off you the minute you saw it, rather than waiting the extra time for that tick to be feeding on you and spitting all of those microbes into you?
Yeah, well, so interestingly, Rich, when I discovered the tick on me, I actually did go to the hospital right away. Like it was within a couple hours of discovering it. It was until later that I connected the dots and thought, ooh, I better go to my GP. Looking back, I mean, now that I know about ticks and, the fact that there's so many out there, like I've got a full length mirror in my bathroom. I'm always looking at all of me, and, pretty or not, I'm like, you know what, this is about survival. This is about your health and your future. So you get that full length, mirror if you live on your own, or you get your spouse or partner or whoever, to help you do full body tick check, because especially, it's things like behind the knees, on your back, the places where maybe on your scalp where you can't see it, or you're maybe just not looking. You need to do that full body tick check. And so, yeah.
So certainly tick checking is one of the important lessons. We should be checking multiple times a day. And we know that ticks are going to go into folds. They're going to look for folded areas, right?
Yeah.
But my question is a little bit different, Dr. Ball.
Okay.
My question is, would you have not just wait until you get to the hospital, not just wait till you go through it, but you have to get the tick off immediately. And you don't
Right.
have to have a perfect kind of tool. You've got to get the tick off you, because the longer the tick is on you,
Yeah.
the more likely it is that you're going to get sick.
Exactly. So I think there's kind of two important points here. The challenge with this case was I couldn't even reach the tick on my back. It was just in such a location that I couldn't even get to it. And I think I did the right thing by going to the hospital. Like, I think I arrived at the hospital. It was probably I would say under 2 hours. If I were bitten by a tick again and said, hey, I can't reach it, I got to go to the hospital, you can bet your bottom dollar that I'd be in the car 5 minutes, not 2 hours, going to the hospital to get that tick off, or going to my next door neighbor, or
Yeah, that's my argument. It is
to get it off right away. Because one of the things that really bothers me is that when you look at what our medical system and our public health is telling us, there's even posters still at my local hospital, in 2023 that say, oh, if it's been on you for less than 24 hours, don't worry. Are you kidding me? Lyme can be transmitted in hours. And the other part too that really bothers me is that it's not just Lyme anymore. It's Anaplasma, it's Babesia, it's Bartonella. And we know that Anaplasma bacteria can be transmitted in minutes. So that tick needs to come off you right away. I think the challenge with me was because it was in a spot on my back that I couldn't even reach. Like, maybe I could have used a back scratcher to yank it off, but then potentially you still have the head stuck in your skin. Right. So, it's kind of a double-edged sword. I'd still say, if I had to do it again, I'd probably scratcher, yank the thing off, then I go to the hospital and say, get the head out right away. Right.
Yeah, and let me challenge you on that, Dr. Ball, because it really doesn't matter if you have the head stuck in you, because that's not going to make you sick, right? And in most cases, if you do get the tick off you and the mouthpiece is still in your back or in your skin, your skin will eject it. And if not, you can go to a dermatologist and have it taken out.
Right.
So
but the part that still concerns me, though, is the bacteria that may be stuck in the salivary glands, the tick, because the bacteria, the Borrelia bacteria, first start off in, I think it's the hindgut of the tick. But then when the tick starts biting, they migrate to the salivary glands. So
right.
I think that's why you really want to get that, because I've just had somebody recently contact me to say, oh, well, we took the tick off, but the head's still in there. And I'm like, yeah, you still need to take this seriously, because there could still be some transmission, right? Yeah.
Right. So let's move back to where we were before we took the rich digression, and you have your tick bite and your symptoms developing. And now Amy's going to start to ask you some questions about how your health declined after that now flu-like set of symptoms you were suffering. So, Aimee?
Okay, so like what you described, I feel like is so many like Lyme warriors' life. Like, you're okay. Well, no, I'm not okay. But a few days later, oh, I think I'm fine now. It was just like a cold. Oh, no, I think I had the flu. Oh, no, I think I've been hit by a bus. Like, but I'm okay. Until just one day you're like, I'm actually not okay. And number one, it's so hard to get people to believe you, which drives me crazy, because like in all of that, you just look normal. Like, you look like you've been hit by a bus, but you look just like you did 6 months ago. So like, it's really hard sometimes to get like the support of your friends and family, because they're like, you don't look like you have the flu. Like, when you have the flu or you have a stomach bug, you're pale, you're washed out, you look terrible. Like, someone comes over and leaves soup at your door and they're like, oh my gosh, you look terrible, I'm leaving. But when it's something like this, like a tick-borne illness, you look totally fine. You don't look any different than you did last week. And so first, like when you were talking to friends or family about, you think it might be a tick-borne illness, you're going to go to the doctor, were there any like comments kind of like, but you kind of look fine? Did you deal with the stigma of, but you look fine, before you even had a diagnosis?
At that stage, not really, because I wasn't sure what was going on, and people are just like, oh, you're not feeling well, and we hadn't really sort of connected the dots. We weren't really thinking about it. My GP kind of did, when I went in and said, I'm sick. This isn't just the flu, and it's not just seasonal allergies or cold or whatever. Like, I'm sick, and I think this is Lyme disease. And she's like, well, you look okay. And of course, then we do the, the 2-tier Lyme testing, and she's like, oh, it's negative, you're fine. And then we come back to, oh, it's just burnout because you've been through, some really big, life crises over the past several years, and you're perimenopausal, and, you've just been through divorce and all this kind of stuff. So everything kind of gets shunted towards other explanations. It takes you away from that diagnosis that you need to get quickly. And I mean, it's one of the things that I say to people, and including information in the book, which is just that, you need to act quickly, get that tick off you right away. Because first of all, it's not just Lyme, it's anaplasma, it's babesia, other tick-borne illnesses that can be transmitted quickly. And you need to get on treatment right away. And that is our biggest challenge, really, isn't it? Getting that diagnosis and getting treatment.
Absolutely. So like when your doctor kind of like brushed off, oh, you've just been going through all of that, what was your response, and were you like, oh, okay, you're right, I've been through a lot, but like you had this feeling that it was Lyme or tick-borne illness or something like that. So how did you kind of like stand your ground and like go forward in getting that diagnosis?
Yeah. So the first time I went in not feeling well, because I at that point I was kind of like, is this Lyme? And went into her office, and then she said, oh, I think it's just burnout. And she did actually draw some blood. We did the tick testing through the public health 2-tier tick testing, which we know is terrible. And again, I trusted her because I didn't know the science at that point. And then I had gotten a little bit better, but then it was probably about maybe 10 days later that I got really, really sick. And that's when I was like, okay, I think this is Lyme disease. And I started to talk to people. So I started to reach out to people who I knew who either had Lyme disease or, a friend of mine who's a scientist who actually works in the field of Lyme disease. And then I just started to read. And, as a scientist, it's like, I want to connect the dots. I'm a knowledge sponge. I want to read everything. So I started to look at the symptoms, and I went, oh my goodness, check, 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 check. And I was like, okay, that's it. I need to get back in there. And then, my friend said to me, she said, yeah, but Shell, with your symptoms, she said, it sounds like you might also have Bartonella, but certainly babesiosis. Because at that point, I felt like an elephant sitting on my chest. I could not get air in. And I was starting to get this feeling of pressure in my head and various things. And so at that point, I kind of said to myself, okay, based on talking to people who have been through this, and all the reading of, the science and everything, I think this is, unfortunately, the hat trick of Lyme disease, Lyme, Bartonella, and babesia. So I go into my doctor's office, and she's like, no, I think it's just burnout. And I'm like, I don't think so. So anyway, she said, well, let me test you, because I had really, really bad migratory joint pain. She said, well, let me test you for rheumatoid arthritis and a bunch of other things. And I said to her, I said, look, you can test me for anything that you want, but please give me some antibiotics.
Yeah.
And so I didn't get them right away. And I think it was if I remember correctly, it was a third visit, not long after that I went back. And I thought, because at that point, I think I'd had 2 negative Lyme tests. And she said, see, you don't have Lyme disease. And of course, at that point, I'd start to read about how poor the 2-tier testing was that we do here under public health in Canada. And also just the way that Lyme works and how it manipulates your immune system, that you can have Lyme disease and absolutely have a negative Lyme test. And so I started to accumulate evidence. And I walked into, I think it was a third appointment, walked into my doctor's office with about a 12-inch stack of printouts of scientific papers about Lyme disease and how it manipulates your immune system, and about how poor the testing was. And so I walked into her office and I plopped it down on our desk, and I said, let's talk about Lyme testing and a negative test, and that you can still have Lyme. And so, and that I likely also have babesiosis. And she said, babesi what? And I was like, uh-oh. So anyway, so I convinced her to give me 3 weeks of doxycycline. But I said, what about the babesiosis? And she said, well, I've just looked at your test results, and you don't have hemolytic anemia, so I think you're fine. So I don't feel fine. And anyways, I ended up going to a naturopath to deal with the babesiosis. And so I was on the 3 weeks of doxycycline at that point, but I knew that I needed treatment for babesiosis. Went to a local naturopath and was accounting my lifestyle and everything that had happened. And she said, do you realize that based on your symptoms and how quickly those symptoms hit, you probably are already in chronic Lyme, and you have had Lyme disease since you were a kid, probably. And based on your symptoms, it sounds like you're also dealing with Bartonella and most certainly babesiosis. So then I got onto some herbs. And she said to me, because this is, I think you're already well down the chronic Lyme rabbit hole. You need more antibiotics. So I went back to my GP and asked for another 3 weeks, and she said no. And so I kind of fought back and said, in a polite way, and just said, look, here's why I probably have chronic Lyme and why I need those extra 3 weeks. So we had some conversations about it. And in the end, she said, I'm not super comfortable with this, but, she said, you actually know more about Lyme disease than I do. And, she said, I've thought long and hard about this. Okay, I will give you the other 3 weeks. So I had another 3 weeks of doxycycline. And I have to say, by the end of that 3 weeks, I was feeling so much better.
Yeah.
And then about a week and a half after the doxycycline was done, boom, I was so sick. I did not think I was going to be alive in 6 to 8 months.
So when you got to that point, like the ups and downs, number one, you're fighting your doctor, which I think is something so many of us go through, which is so frustrating because, like, especially growing up, for me, I was diagnosed in high school, like, your doctors know everything. Like, you have a stuffy nose, you go to the doctor. Your throat hurts, you go to the doctor. Oh, your arm hurts, you go to the doctor, because they just know. Like, your parents don't know a question, the doctor does. Like, you're gonna go because
Right.
they know everything. And then all of a sudden you go and they're like, what is that? Or, like, wait, what's a co-infection? Wait, ticks can do that? Oh no, we don't have that here. So, like, all of a sudden this, like, pedestal that your doctor has been on for so long comes crashing down, and then you question everything because you're like, am I gonna have to be my own doctor now? So what was that like for you? Like, you're like, oh, I'm feeling better on the antibiotics. Oh, now I'm kind of worse. Wait, I might have chronic Lyme. What are you talking about? This isn't new. Like, coming from a naturopath, like, what was that like for you emotionally? For number one, for especially you having a PhD and being involved in the science field, like, what was it like for you to realize that someone that you thought knew everything doesn't know anything at all about how to help you and almost doesn't believe you at this point?
Yeah, that's a really, really tough kind of phase of this journey that far too many of us are on. And you go through this entire range of emotions, because I think early on, there's kind of that self-doubt. Oh, no, it's not Lyme, it's whatever, right? And it's really unfortunate, but you kind of put Lyme at the back of the list or the bottom of the list of, oh, here's what it is. Like, you kind of knock other things off first. And our GPs do that. And I think, I mean, I had a really, really wonderful GP, and she's a wonderful human being. She's just trained by a system that doesn't know about Lyme disease. There's a massive body of peer-reviewed science literature out there now on Lyme and tick-borne diseases. It's just that our medical system refuses to acknowledge it. Yeah. And this is sad, and I don't say this in a mean way, but I have now realized that, at least in North America, our mainstream medical system are the equivalent of climate deniers when it comes to tick-borne diseases, because there's a huge body of science, but they refuse to look at it and acknowledge it. And so you go through this kind of emotional roller coaster of, what is this? I think in some ways I had the advantage of a scientific background, and I think the confidence to read the science, talk to other people, with Lyme, what their experience was, and then to really advocate for myself, because that's what I've learned is the most important kind of part of this process is your self-advocacy, right, for your own treatment. And it was hard because, I really liked my GP, and she was a wonderful person, and I think a very good GP, but she was trained in a system that's not built to deal with these diseases. And it's tough, because then it kind of puts you in this adversarial position with your GP, which I didn't want to be in. And she truly wanted to help me. The one thing, we never talked about the elephant in the room, and that's about the fact that the maximum number of weeks of doxycycline she could give me was 6 weeks. So I asked for more than 6 weeks when I got really, really sick, and she's like, nope, sorry, I can't do it. And I never kind of directly asked her why, because at that point I had finally learned that any doctor who gives more than 6 weeks of doxycycline, in other words, is treating outside of kind of the IDSA guidelines, is likely to be investigated by the medical board, the licensing board. And so I think doctors are afraid, and the health clinic that she was at, I'm sure their lawyers said, don't you dare give her one more day of antibiotics, because then it creates a liability for them. And so that's a really hard thing to wrestle with, because there were times where I was kind of angry with her, not personally, but more with the system that she was forced to practice under. And so it really was very much an emotional roller coaster. But I think where I was lucky was because I had the science background and could understand this stuff and was able to advocate for myself. I pushed really hard. I do have to say that when I got so sick, like I was at the point where I could barely even walk into her office. And there was at one point where it got so bad, she actually sent me to the local ER.
Mhm.
Because she said, I don't know how to help you anymore, but you are clearly very, very sick.
Yeah.
Went to the ER and they did nothing, right? So I think her heart was in the right place, but she was practicing under a system that had handcuffed her to do anything.
Yeah, it can be so frustrating, like you said, like having a good doctor who wants to help you, but legally they can't, because then you become a liability, and you have to wonder, like, what if they could give you 3 more weeks? What if they could give you this thing that they're not allowed to give you?
Right.
So that wasn't
But
working, and you couldn't take any more antibiotics, and you also go to this like naturopath. Like, what was the culture shock like for you? Because I think that happens to all of us. We start out like at our pediatrician or like our
yeah,
GP and all of this, like, just this Western medicine. And I feel like most of us end up at some kind of naturopath, and there is culture shock. What was that like for you? Because I know for me, like I was sitting in the doctor's office with like my mom and grandma, this like hippie doctor, and we're like, what is this? I think that happens to everybody. What was that like for
yeah.
you?
It was talking about being split between two different worlds. I
Yeah.
mean, I think as a scientist, I'm very kind of open-minded. I think I just naturally, as a human, I am anyways. But so I was very open to going to a naturopath, but I'd never been to one before.
Yeah.
Or actually, I shouldn't say that. I had been to one before, but it had nothing to do with like, it was just for like general health.
Yeah.
And it was kind of more general wellness. So I wasn't really exposed to very much of kind of like naturopathic medicine. And so, here I'm getting this from my GP, and then I'm sitting in this naturopath's office who says, wow, you don't just have Lyme disease, you've got Bartonella, you've got Babesia, you've got chronic Lyme, you need 3 more weeks of doxycycline, and here's a pile of botanicals that will help you, right? And you're kind of, it's a lot to process, because you're really straddling two different worlds. And it took me a little bit to get my brain around it. And I have to say, this feeling kind of came later in my journey when I found a functional medicine doctor and went on like full-blown treatment, which kind of comes later in the story. But kind of 90 to 95% of my treatment at that point was botanical, was herbal. And I remember kind of thinking like, is this okay?
Mhm.
And it was kind of almost like this cognitive dissonance, because I know as a scientist that most of our pharmaceuticals come from nature originally.
Yeah.
It's just that the compound gets tweaked chemically and then synthesized,
Yeah.
synthetically, right? But that's the active compounds are very often, derived from nature. So I'm sitting here going, well, I know that this stuff comes from nature, and I know that traditional medicine is important and traditional knowledge, and we've got 2,000 years of Chinese medicine, but then your other foot's rooted in a allopathic medical system that says, oh my gosh, this is witchcraft.
Yeah.
And yet this is the only thing that is only door that's open for you right now, offering some treatments and solutions. So
Yeah.
it's a really tough thing, I think, to deal with. It's very much an emotional roller coaster. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you started at your GP, started antibiotics, and now you're at the naturopath and doing botanicals. What was like the success with that? I guess, were you feeling any improvement with that route? Like what specifically were you doing, and like how were you feeling in that?
Yeah. So once the 6 weeks of antibiotics finished, as I say, I just crashed. I was so sick. And at that point, I wasn't sure what to do. So I had already been to the naturopath, and she'd put me on botanicals. My Babesia symptoms seemed to be alleviating a bit, in that, I wasn't having the same air hunger and the same head pressure and that sort of thing. So I was kind of like, okay, well, maybe I'm feeling a little bit better. But then, I was kind of stuck in limbo. And I think at one point I actually felt a little bit like a deer in the headlights, not sure what to do, because I thought, do I go back to my GP? Do I go, because at that point, I didn't have the experience or the understanding that my GP's, hands were tied, that she couldn't do anything else for me. Do I go back to this naturopath? And anyway, so I ended up being so sick at one point, I actually went back to my local ER because I could hardly stand up. I could hardly breathe. I was just, like I was just getting sicker and sicker. And I said to the ER doctor, I need help, and explain the symptoms. But then I explained, of course, as soon as I mentioned Lyme disease, the whole conversation went down the tubes. And he got angry with me. And I told him, I said, look, I felt so much better after these 6 weeks of antibiotics, but it's at this point, we're probably a month off of the antibiotics. I'm really, really sick. And I said, I need help. I need more antibiotics. And he looks at me and he says, well, what do you expect me to do about it? And he yelled this at me. And at that point, I just felt like death warmed over. And I said, look, I'm the one who's being denied access to healthcare by my medical system. What do you expect me to do about it? And I yelled it at him. And that got his attention. And I never in my life have I ever yelled at a doctor. And I don't advocate for that.
Yeah.
But I felt cornered. I felt like I had no choice. And I have to say, it got his attention. And I think basically what I was trying to communicate to him was, treat me with respect, please.
Yeah.
I'm sick. I'm coming to you for help. So don't belittle me and don't berate me. Help me.
Yeah.
And so his heart kind of softened at that point. And he says, well, let's sit tight and we'll run a bunch of tests. And I said, look, I just had those tests done 3 weeks ago. I can tell you what the results are going to be. Everything's going to be normal. I have Lyme disease, Bartonella, and Babesia. Anyway, we do the tests and everything comes back normal. And he says to me, he says, there's not a whole lot I can do for you. But he said, would you like me to actually refer you to a local internist doctor? Maybe he can help you. And I said, sure, I'll take anything. All right. I'm not going to turn it down any kind of medical help. And so I said, yes, please. I'd appreciate that. So it took about another 3 weeks before I heard from the internist office. And so the receptionist from the internist office said, so what's your appointment about? Why do you want to come here? And I said, Lyme disease. And she's like, no, click. Hung up on me.
Yeah. I feel like in a lot of doctors' offices, like trying to find a new doctor when you're going through this season of diagnosis and trying to find treatment, you say Lyme disease and it's either absolutely not, bye, or that's not real, no, or oh well, we'll send you to this different person because we don't really do that here. You're kind of just like, nobody wants you or nobody believes you in that season.
That's right.
Like that, it's already isolating enough, and then you can't even find like a doctor who likes you. It feels like in a movie, like you're the lame kid who's eating lunch in the bathroom stall because no one wants to get near you. Like, it's terrible. Like everything you're going through is not bad enough already. So they were like,
you just hit on something I think that's really important. And I think, I have such empathy for, fellow Lyme and tick-borne disease sufferers, because we're gaslighted by the medical system.
Yeah.
No, you're fine. No, it's not this. No, go see a psychiatrist, right? Like so my GP actually, just out of, she was at her wit's end, and she said, well, if this is Lyme and babesiosis, she said, we need to get you in to see an infectious disease doctor. So she sent in a referral. I never heard from the infectious disease doctor. So I finally followed up with my GP's office, and they said, well, this is weird. So anyway, so I phoned the infectious disease doctor's office, and they're like, oh, we never got the referral. I'm like, yes, you did. So I go back to my GP, and they said, yeah, we sent it. They got it. We'll resend it. So they resend the referral to the infectious disease doctor. Nothing. So then, another, say, 3 weeks goes by, and I phoned them, and they said, oh, we'll see you when we see you. And I said, well, is that going to be next week, next month, or next year? And they said, we can't tell you. Yeah. And I said, look, I am really, really sick. And they're like, too bad. So I phoned my GP. She actually phoned the infectious disease doctor's office, and they would not speak to her. Mm. So the infectious disease doctor that I was originally referred to refused to see me. I finally, after pushing and pushing and pushing, did get to see an infectious disease doctor. They booked the appointment, at a time and kind of place to deter me from showing up. But I said, I don't care, I'm showing up.
Yeah.
And they tried to convince me that I had HIV/AIDS.
Mm.
And I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And anyway, so I said, look, if you want to test me for that, you go right ahead. But I'll tell you right now, it's negative.
Yeah.
And I'm not in the risk group. And sure enough, it was negative, and that was it.
Mm. So
It
at
was,
this point, you have just gone from doctor to doctor to doctor, as so many of us have.
yeah.
What next? What did you do? How are you feeling? And what was your next step at this point?
So I got to kind of around Labor Day, so early September of 2019. And I was so sick that I thought, my next step is I'm likely going to be in a wheelchair because the neurological symptoms had started to kick in. And I thought the next step is wheelchair, and I don't think I'm going to be around in 6 months to a year. I don't think I'm going to survive this. And it's really funny because I think I am generally a pretty resilient person. But I remember kind of very end of August, beginning September, sitting on my porch, and I had such a feeling of pressure in my head that I thought my brains were going to ooze out through my ears. I was getting numbness and tingling in my arms. My speech was affected. I couldn't read. I thought, am I about to have a stroke? Like, I was really panicked. And I remember sitting out on my back porch, crying, sobbing, going, oh my God, I am really, really sick and nobody will help me. And so I just literally in a panic started to reach out to everybody I knew in our local community who had Lyme disease or even mentioned Lyme disease. And I have to say how phenomenally grateful I am to people, including strangers I had never met before, but was given their phone number through a friend of a friend of a friend because they knew that they had Lyme disease.
Yeah.
And so they gave me some suggestions. Go on this botanical, do this, here's ways to help yourself. Now you need to find a Lyme literate doctor. And so that's kind of where that journey began. And so I didn't know of a Lyme literate doctor in Ontario or even in Canada. I was like, well, where do I start? So I started to look in upstate New York because a lot of Canadians were going to New York State for help. And I thought, how am I going to afford this and the exchange rate and getting across the border when I'm so sick and I'm on my own? But I started phoning, well-known Lyme doctors in that state, and they wouldn't even answer their phones. They were so oversubscribed. They had so many patients that all you could do was leave a voicemail, and 3 weeks later, you've heard nothing back. I got to the point where I was in a panic. And so somebody had said to me, well, there is this Lyme literate doctor in Ontario at a private functional medicine clinic. You have to pay out of pocket for it, but why don't you contact them? The other alternative was to fly out to British Columbia on the west coast of Canada. Because I don't know if it's still true now, but at one point it was the only place in the country where a naturopath could prescribe antibiotics. That's not true in any other province or territory in the country. So I had to then decide, do I try to go to upstate New York? Do I fly out to BC? Or do I try to get in with this functional medicine doctor in Ontario? So I decided to go with the functional medicine doctor in Ontario. So I phoned them. And they don't answer their phone. So I leave a voicemail. I send an email. I'm getting to the point where I'm so sick. I'm just thinking, I don't even know if I'm going to be around in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And so I literally started leaving voicemails, sobbing, saying, I think I'm dying. Please, can I get in to see you? And it was one of those voicemails that led to a phone call. And they said, well, we have a 3-month waiting list. I said, I think I'm going to be dead in 3 months.
Yeah.
So they said, well, fill out the intake paperwork. We'll do what we can do. And then they actually saw me in about 3 weeks, which I am so grateful for. And then that was the start of the journey for treatment and healing.
Yeah. Hearing that, like, I'm just tearing up because I know that so many of us have gone like through that. And the point, like, I remember at the beginning of this year after I got really sick from like not being in remission anymore, it was New Year's Day and I was in tears because I told my husband, I said, I don't think I'm going to make it to the end of this year.
Wow.
Where to now, I have walked 7 miles this week and I'm doing okay, but I didn't know that at the beginning of this year. And that's so hard. You didn't know what you were going to be like here in 2023. So going into that first appointment, what was that like? How did your first appointment go? That 3 weeks later, how did that go?
It was good. I mean, the folks were really, really kind. I actually had to drive to Toronto, so about 5 hours away to do it. And a very, very kind friend of mine actually drove me, and we booked a hotel and stayed overnight. And Yeah, they kind of put you through the whole gamut of things, you know, like vials and vials of blood. You meet with the naturopath, you meet with the MD, you meet with the nutritionist. So it really is a treatment plan. So you're really assigned to a treatment team, right? And it's interesting because that was my first introduction to functional medicine. And I have to say, you know, 5 years down the road, I look at allopathic medicine, so our traditional North American Western medicine, and I think it's bonkers. Like,
Yeah.
functional medicine is about identifying the root cause and treating that, whereas allopathic medicine is, what are your symptoms? Let's slap a pharmaceutical on your symptoms.
Yeah.
And so sadly, it's meant that my faith in non-acute medicine, Western medicine, is gone.
Yeah.
You know, functional medicine is what we should all be practicing, right? Every doctor should be practicing. So it was an introduction to that kind of medicine, that approach to medicine. So it was new to me, and I was kind of intrigued by it. The initial appointments were mostly, you know, taking tests, getting blood drawn, that sort of thing. And then once we got some test results back, then it was, since then it's primarily been virtual appointments. And so it was assigning, okay, here's what your treatment protocol is going to be. And they walk you through it and they explain it and everything. And they were wonderful about it. They basically said, okay, you've got mold infection. We've got to treat the mold before we can even begin to treat the Lyme. So, you know, we actually didn't even start treating my Lyme disease until several months into the process. The first part of it was about getting rid of the mold.
Yeah.
You know, detoxing through binders. I was on anti-malaria medication for babesiosis because I had a really bad case of babesiosis. I tested positive for Bartonella. So they said, you know, we do want to treat you for that, but we need to boost your immune system up before your body can even process any antibiotics for the Lyme and the Bartonella. And so we were really focused on killing the mold, detoxing, boosting my immune system, and reducing some of that systemic inflammation that you get from these persistent infections. And then once we kind of got down the line a little bit, that's when, you know, the antibiotics and the anti-malarias showed up. And I mean, at one point, I have to say, it's a double-edged sword. I am so phenomenally grateful to that functional medicine clinic, which I still go to. I'm so phenomenally grateful to the people who helped me. But I can tell you, swallowing about 80 pills a day is brutal.
It's a lot.
It's like a survival mode that you go into, isn't it? You know, I couldn't even take baby aspirin when I was a kid. I couldn't swallow a pill. And here I am now having to swallow 80 footballs.
Yep.
But you throw it down your throat because you know you need to, because otherwise you may not make it, right?
Yeah. It's one of those things, like you said, like when I was younger, like my mom would have to, like, you know, crush my pill, put it in applesauce so I could get it down. And then it's like a few years later, it's like 14 pills at once, like getting them all down. And it's just like one of those things you never think you'd have to do until you have to do it. I like how you touched on with your form of treatment, how an approach that I think seems to be very effective for anyone in Lyme, no matter what their treatment is peeling back the layers of the onion. You can't just attack Lyme right away. Like, you have to get your body ready to fight. There's always other stuff. There's mold going on. There's Epstein-Barr. There's all these different things. And it's like peeling back the layers of the onion until you're ready. You can't just attack everything at once. So I love that you touched on that. That was an approach for them as well.
That's a really important part of the story, I think, because I wouldn't say I was ready to have a fight with my Lyme doctor, my functional medicine doctor, but I was like, why can't I have antibiotics? I'm sick. I need antibiotics. He said, no, you don't understand. He said, we can give you antibiotics, but your body is not in a condition to actually process those antibiotics and actually use them. So we can give you antibiotics, but maybe your body's only able to kind of use about 20% of it. That's not going to kill anything, right? And so a lot of it was me being educated by my Lyme doctor, my Lyme literate doctor, to understand this whole process and this whole onion and how you have to, you know, peel back those layers, right? So you're really kind of learning on the fly. And I think, you know, an interesting part of this too is that, you know, I had just been denied treatment by, you know, our public healthcare system here in Canada. And so you develop a lack of trust. But here's this functional medicine doctor who really wants to help you, and you're paying big dollars for the treatment.
Yeah.
And you know that they want to help you, and you have to trust them. But you're like, I want those antibiotics. And he's like, not yet.
Yeah. I think that's so hard going through Lyme as well. It seems like the only way to get better is to go against the norm. And like you said, the public healthcare system wasn't able to help you. But at that point, you're like, what's the point of all of this? Like, they're supposed to be there to help us. Now I'm having to spend money out of my own pocket, money that I'm struggling to even make because I'm unable to work because I'm so sick. And it's like, you either pay bills or you go to treatment. Like,
Mhm.
was that hard for you? I know that like our medical systems in America and Canada are similar but different all at the same time. What was that like for you to kind of realize that the healthcare system was failing you in that instance?
It was brutal. I mean, it on multiple levels. So emotionally, it was horrible because I felt like I felt like I had been abandoned, very much so. So I kind of had a lot of almost like sadness or grief over that. Really, it's like grief and having to process it because you're like, this is a system I grew up with that's always been there for me, and now it's saying, sorry, we're not going to give you any treatment because of the nature of the disease that you supposedly have, right? And you're thinking, are you kidding me? So you're dealing with that. Then there's the anger because you've just been gaslighted by the medical system that your tax dollars supports, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, hang on a second, I have a right to access our medical system. But
Yeah.
they say, no, actually you can't because of the type of disease you supposedly have. So you go through sort of all of these things. And then again, there's the lack of trust. So you're trying to build up the trust with your new functional medicine doctor, who's wonderful and is doing great things, but it's very much a learning journey. Interestingly too, I also tested positive for Rocky Mountain spotted fever.
Mm.
And we have no idea where I contracted that. And of course, we don't know, was it 2 months ago at that point? Was it, 2 years ago or 20 years
Yeah.
ago? It could have been down in Costa Rica. It could have been when I was doing my field work in Missouri. We don't know. The good
Yeah.
thing is that, it was an IgG antibody, which suggests past infection. But, my point is that you're almost getting like a crash course in tick-borne diseases.
Yeah.
And while you're trying to learn all this like scientific and technical medical information, you're also processing all of these emotions. And it's really hard because
Yeah.
the other part of it too is it's chronic illness, right? And when you're first on treatment, you're first sick and you're so sick. And I don't mean to say this in a disrespectful way, but you tend to get a lot of empathy and support from people.
Yeah.
But with chronic illness, when you're a few years into chronic illness, people don't want to hear about it. They want you, when they ask you how you are, they want you to say fine. They don't want you to say, oh my God, I feel like dirt today.
Yeah. I love that you touched on that because that's so true. Like from when you first get sick to whether it's 2 years or 20 years down the road, it's like, I don't know that it's necessarily that people don't care. I think it's
I
just
think they care.
it's old news to them, and it's not something they can comprehend because it's not something they go through on a day-to-day basis. Like I said before, we look fine. They see us out and about at the grocery store, at church, whatever. So it's like they say, hey, how are you? They don't want us to be like, oh, well, it kind of feels like my foot's on fire and I can't remember anything, but I'm doing all right. They just want to be like, want us to say, oh, we're fine. Like, thank you so much. And another thing that you said was so true, like with the public healthcare system, like treating Lyme is like, oh, we can't help you. I think it can be incredibly frustrating because it's not our fault. I think that's one of the most frustrating things I dealt with. I didn't do anything to get Lyme disease. There's nothing that I did. I was not being irresponsible. I wasn't taking care of my body. It's not like I was out here smoking 10 packs of cigarettes a day. Like there was nothing that I did to make myself sick, but then you're punished because you have Lyme, and that's not something on their big menu of things that they treat. But it's not your fault at the same time. So that's so frustrating. I love that you touched on that as well. So kind of just walk us through your like you're at this point seeing the functional medicine doctor, like walk us through what that looked like kind of up until this point.
Yeah. So as I say, the first part was treating the mold. So I did actually have mold testing done, and it's not cheap. It was, I think, about $600-700 Canadian just to get the testing done in the US. But it was really important. I came back positive for 4 different molds, and almost, I think, certainly ochratoxin and black mold was in there. And all of my mold infections were in the 95th to 100th percentile. In other words, my body was just loaded with mold. So that absolutely had to become the first step. And that was really hard because a lot of the treatment for mold, the prescription, the antifungals that you take are, really hard on your body, and they can actually make you feel pretty crappy. And that's one of the hard things, I think, with treatment of tick-borne diseases, is that sometimes the treatment is almost as bad as the disease, right? And, whether you're herxing or, I've just been reinfected or dealing with a reinfection or a reemergence of babesiosis, because the babesia that's here is recalcitrant. It's very treatment resistant. And, I was back on anti-malarias, and I was like, I had to stop it because it was making me so sick. And, I'm not trying to kind of be overly dramatic about it, but very often I liken tick-borne diseases to cancer, in that the treatment can make you kind of feel as sick as the disease that you're dealing, or the condition that you're dealing with. And then, kind of our goal is remission, right? Our goal is to try to get ourselves as better as possible, feeling as good as possible, as functional as possible. But we know that we're going to likely to have flare-ups, and that, I joke with some of my Lyme friends, but it's like playing whack-a-mole, right? It's like you finally, your Lyme, infection flares up, so you finally beat that one down, and then your Bartonella comes back up, and after you beat that one down, the babesiosis pops back up, and you're just constantly playing this whack-a-mole. So it's hard, but you're right, it's like an onion. You have to peel back the layers. So the first layers were those mold treatments, and then a lot of herbals to reduce inflammation and to boost my immune system. And as my Lyme doctor explained, what we're trying to do is kickstart your own immune system so that it kicks in to start trying to suppress the infection, so that we're not having to 100% antibiotics. We want your own internal body to start fighting this infection too. So that was a real learning process. And I got to the point where it's like, yeah, I really have to trust this doctor. And, and the whole medical team was fantastic. And I'm, really grateful for their help. Once we got to the point where I was starting to get a little bit better, he's like, okay, now we're going to hammer it with the antibiotics. So we're going to go after the Bartonella. We're going to go after the babesia with anti-malaria medication. We're going to go after the Lyme. And so then you're on like 4 different antibiotics plus anti-malaria. And oh my God, and then the herxing. I was like, I would hear Lyme patients say this, herxing. What's herxing? Oh boy, do you ever get blasted. And you learn really quickly what a Herxheimer reaction is, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So have you continued that same treatment from then up till now?
On and off. So it's really interesting, kind of the twists and turns that my personal journey have taken. So I was probably on, I would say, really aggressive treatment for probably about 8 to 10 months. And then kind of started to sort of wean down a little bit, where we were more focused on reducing systemic inflammation, bolstering my immune system, trying to get my own body to keep these infections at a low level. Because we know, at least the current science says, suggests that, these infections, we've got them for life, right? Whether or not that's true, and new treatments come up that, that might actually be a cure. I think the big thing right now is just getting yourself to feeling better, being healthier, and being functional and being happy, right?
Yeah.
Having a happy life. And so for me, it was very much a roller coaster, because I would deal with flare-ups. And so we'd have to then address those. The other thing that was really awful was that, unfortunately, I was getting reinfected. So I now have 3 husky mixed dogs, so big dogs, plus 2 cats. Cats are indoors, but of course the huskies go outside. They're on tick preventatives. I do tick checks, I take all of the precautions. But because I spend so much of my days outside, I ended up getting bitten a couple of other times. One time was my own stupidity, because, I always spray myself with a Icaritin spray when I go outside. It was this one time where it was like, oh, I'm just going to go outside and pick up this flower pot and come in. Like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
That was enough for me to pick up the tick and get bitten. And so I have had some bites since then. So whether or not I've been reinfected, or whether or not those bites have then just triggered like a resurgence of the existing infections, you don't really know. But what it has meant is that over the past 5 years, I've had to go back on treatment again and again and again. And it's interesting because I would still say I'm very fortunate because I would say the maximum I ever really kind of, for the most part, got better was about 70-80%. And then I would kind of cycle and get sick again. And I did have a couple of periods, including about a year and a half ago, where I actually had felt better than I had in like 10 years. And I was like, oh my goodness, have I like crossed the line to, well, you know, I've made it past this. And then I got sick again. And I think that's unfortunately one of the challenges, which is dealing with either the reinfection or just the resurgence of your chronic infections, right? But for the most part, you know, like at least I've been functional. I've been able to work. I have to say I've spent a lot of time in the past 5 years where I felt really, really crappy. But I think what I have learned is that you don't ignore it, but I think you just have to soldier on. You have to get on with your life. It's very hard because Lyme and tick-borne diseases are very socially isolating. And, you know, we talked about chronic illness, and, you know, I've got wonderful friends who care, but you know, as you said, it's kind of old news and people get to the point where they don't want to hear about it. I mean, I had people, you know, who said to me, who, you know, knew what I was battling, and they're like, oh, but you look really good. And sometimes it depended on the person, but sometimes I'd say, hey, I might look great, but I feel like death warmed over right now, but I'm smiling my way through it. That's really hard because you can really, when you really need people's care, and, you know, I'm divorced now. And so I'm on my own, and it's a really lonely journey. And I don't think it helps us when we feel that isolation. I don't think that's a healthy way for us to exist. And so I think we need to find ways to kind of deal with that and kind of fill that void and to get the support when we need it. And I think that's where often the Lyme community comes in, is getting a lot of empathy from people who are also suffering. The other part of it that we haven't really talked about is I'm over $60,000 in debt to stay alive. And my retirement's gone. It has turned my future upside down.
Yeah.
And I'm still dealing with it. And you know, with interest rates the way they are, I'm worried about losing my house in a couple of years once I have to remortgage, right? If interest rates stay high. But you know what? You can't, I've realized that I can't worry about it. I've realized that I just have to say, you know what? It is what it is. It's my reality. And I'm just going to have to cross that bridge if and when I come to it. But I'm in a financial state, as are many, many Lyme patients, that we never chose. I mean, I have a colleague, a friend here in Ontario that I met recently, and she spent over $250,000 on treatment. Yeah. It's awful.
It's one of those things, like we were talking before, it's like you have to pay an arm and a leg to stay alive. It's one of those things, it's not fair, but like at this point, there's really nothing to do about it besides just do it. Like you have to go into debt. You have to choose, oh, well, I'm not going to have this nice thing because I need to lay down $5,000 at the doctor this week, or I'm not going to get my treatment. Like, it's just one of those things. Like, I mean, maybe I should start playing the lottery. I don't know, because like, it's so expensive, and it just sucks that our public healthcare system can't take care of that.
Exactly.
So,
well,
to wrap it up, you go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, you just kind of, you know, tweaked a thought, and I think this is kind of, should we say, like the next phase of the journey, which is I got to the point where it's like I can't afford to treat anymore. And so I got really busy reading more and more of the science. And so it'd be like, okay, well, what botanicals can I take that are antimicrobial? And you know, what other things can I take that will help to, you know, alleviate some of the inflammation? So then I started leaning heavily on functional mushrooms. And so I've done a lot of learning myself, and you know, for better or for worse, have basically become my own doctor, because I couldn't, the $250 for an appointment, you know, I couldn't afford to, you know, to see my functional medicine doctor more than, you know, 3 or 4 times a year. And then even the supplements, I mean, the supplements and the treatment at one point were costing me about $1,700 a month. I didn't have the money for it. I had to go into debt for this. You know, and so it's also kind of forced me to get creative and say, okay, well, what are the other treatment modalities that we might have? Because we know there's a whole slew of different things that we can do out there. One thing I want to mention, because it was actually you guys who put me onto this, and it has been a really important step in my recovery. I'm going to qualify that by saying I'm only just coming off feeling like death warmed over from a resurgence of babesia. So the species of babesia we have here in Eastern Ontario, Babesia otocoilii, is very treatment resistant. And it is now as common as Lyme and Anaplasma in our area. So it's all over the place. And so I did have to go back on anti-malaria medication, which did not make me feel good, but I'm finally starting to get back on my feet. But yeah, so I've, for the most part, have kind of backed off of treatment and have become very selective of what botanicals and what supplements that I actually do take, because I've got a very limited budget right now. And I'll kind of cycle through certain things. So I'll often go to like Bill Rawls' book to see, what are some herbs that I can use. I've gone to other sources. But it was really interesting because back in, when was it? I want to say it was back in maybe about February or something like that of this year. I was really, really sick. So I have chronic gut issues, which is pretty normal for most people with chronic tick-borne diseases, right? Because your whole immune system is messed up, and most of us have food sensitivities and leaky gut. And I was actually diagnosed with late onset Crohn's disease when I was in my early 40s. So that was my third autoimmune disease. When I was doing my master's degree in the early 90s, I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome before it was kind of a known entity, and really, really sick for a couple of years with that. Ever since I was diagnosed with late onset Crohn's, I've had these food sensitivities. They were pretty low level, and because it was late onset Crohn's, the symptoms aren't as bad, and I was just managing through diet, no medication. Anyways, the whole food sensitivity thing and the gut issues got really bad during treatment, especially when you're on antibiotics and all this stuff. And anyways, so I had gotten my gut issues got really bad this past winter, to the point where I thought, man, I'm going to end up in a hospital. Like, I got to the point where it wasn't just gluten and dairy. I couldn't eat a single food without reacting to it. And I thought, I can't eat anymore. Like, what's going on? Am I going to end up in the ER? Am I going to end up in the hospital and losing part of my bowel because this whole disease has gone crazy because of my immune issues? So I was lying in bed this one Friday because I was so sick I couldn't work. And I was listening to you guys. And you guys had Ben Aarons on. And so we were talking about the neural retraining and kind of the whole, limbic system involvement in tick-borne illnesses. And it was really interesting because for some reason, about 2 weeks before I listened to your podcast with Ben, I'd been reading actually about the whole kind of neurobiology and the neurological and the limbic system involvement in Lyme disease. But I had originally gotten into it because I had a couple of friends who had long haul COVID. And as I started to read the science, I started to realize that chronic Lyme and long haul COVID are basically the same disease. They're post-infection inflammatory syndromes that affect, to a very large degree, your nervous system, right? And so I started to read about how the infection causes systemic inflammation. It crosses the blood-brain barrier. It inflames your brain. When your brain is inflamed and you get stuck in sympathetic dominance or sympathetic overdrive, it creates more inflammation in your body, and you get stuck in this positive feedback loop of inflammation, which explains the chronic gut issues. Like, most of my symptoms from chronic Lyme now are cognitive and neurological. And, to the point where my short-term memory is shot, and and I've got sort of like some pre-dementia symptoms, which are really frightening, at the age of 58. And so I listened to the podcast with Ben Aarons, and I'm like, I've just been reading about this in the science. Oh my goodness. And so I got onto Ben's website and I started to read more. And I really loved how Ben talked about the science behind it. It wasn't just, hey, I, tried this and tripped over it, whatever, but he got into the science. I watched his TED Talk. And I went, oh my goodness. So I got onto his website and I signed up for Reorigin. And that's been a really, really important step for me. And I have to say, it's one of the things that, had I known about this aspect of chronic disease, and especially chronic tick-borne illnesses, had I known then, early in my condition, what I know now, I probably would have migrated away from supplements and gone on to the neural retraining a lot sooner.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I love that you shared that, and just kind of even sharing how helpful the Tick Bootcamp podcast has been to all of us. And sometimes you'll be listening and you'll hear a little thing. You're like, wait, that's a thing. Or, oh, I forgot about that. It's just kind of, I just love this community.
It's like a light bulb went off when I was listening to, you guys at Tick Bootcamp, and you got, Ben Aaron's on, and I'm going, oh my goodness, it just resonated with me. And then of course the scientist in me is like gobbling up all the science I can. And, and now my whole understanding of chronic Lyme and chronic tick-borne diseases, to be honest, is very different than where I started. I've now realized that chronic tick-borne illnesses are actually an autoimmune disease of your brain. Mm-hmm. And that treating your brain is one of the most important things. Your inflamed brain, treating that is actually one of the most important things that you can do. I'm not saying that there isn't a role for antibiotics or anti-malaria or anything else. But the other thing that I've learned too is the fact that 70 to 80% of our immune system sits in our gut. So if we're constantly taking antibiotics for tick-borne infections, bacterial infections like Borrelia, what is that doing to our gut? And are we kind of shooting ourselves in the foot because we're harming our gut and our immune system by taking the antibiotics? We're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place there. Am I saying don't ever take antibiotics? Absolutely not. There's most definitely a time and a place for antibiotics. But I think, my thinking now is don't rely on those so much when you're like far down chronic Lyme. I think early in Lyme, they make a bigger difference. I think at this point, when you're in chronic Lyme, I think that's when you should be treating an inflamed brain.
Yeah, I agree. So in all of this, all these years of your different treatments, how are you now? Like, how are you doing today?
It's interesting because up until this recent resurgent of babesiosis, for the most part, I've been doing pretty good. And I've had times where I've been kind of 60 to 70% better than I was at my sickest. I've had times where I was 95% better. I've had times where I was 50% better. So it's very much a little bit of a kind of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And I think I'm much more of an optimist and a realist than a pessimist. But I've really learned that you kind of almost have to kind of come to terms with the fact that, the hardest thing I struggle with is that if I go through a period where I feel really good and you're like, yes, I'm finally on a track and I feel really good. You're still trying to eat well. You're still trying to take care of yourself and, get enough sleep and do all these other things to support your immune system, your general health. But then boom, it hits again. Something, you either get reinfected or you get a resurgence of an existing infection and it hammers you down and you get sick and you feel like crap. I think for me, the hardest part is psychologically going, I was doing so well, but I think what's really important, mindset matters, right? And I think sometimes we don't give enough credit to kind of our kind of psychology and how we approach this. And so, what I've really had to do is kind of like, dig myself out of the hole and say, hang on a second, it's temporary. Take your medication for a bit, make sure, baby yourself a little bit, right? Take the supplements, back off your schedule a bit so you're not as busy, like do all the things that you need to do for you to feel better, but know that you will get better, right?
Absolutely. It's like one of those things, like it's very hard when you've been doing so good and then all of a sudden you're not, to remind yourself you were doing good and you can get back to that. You just can't get in your head. But it's really hard when your brain's inflamed and you're trying not to get down on yourself and the whole cycle.
But the other part of that brain inflammation that we often, I think it gets talked about in the Lyme community, but not outside the Lyme community, are the impacts of that brain inflammation on psychiatric aspects, right? So I've never been like, I've always been super happy and cheerful and passionate about life. I got to the point where it's like, I don't care about anything. I'm depressed. I have bad anxiety. I'll be honest, like many, and probably most Lyme patients, I had thoughts of suicide at one point. and which is horrible. I've never been there before. And I still deal with, bouts of kind of depression, anxiety. And I think, I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily the cause of it, but I kind of call it my my lack of, my desire for dopamine. It's like I've always been a super motivated person, and then I'd be like, don't care. All the things that I was passionate about, I had zero interest in. And so in some ways, I would say the hardest parts for me getting through kind of chronic tick-borne illnesses have been the psychological parts of it, the coming to terms with the cognitive deficits, because I'm way too young to have that, but I have it and I have to deal with it. And really, yeah, like you walk this fine line between acceptance and coming to peace with it, but at the same time, you're not going to just kind of roll over and accept it. You're still always pushing, hey, what could I do in terms of treatment, or what other things might be out there that could help me? I'm always kind of looking forward. I refuse to park in a pity party, I guess. Like I definitely have days where I feel sorry for myself, absolutely. But my philosophy in life has been to say, give yourself a bit of time to feel bad, to kind of look at your wounds, to feel truly horrible, and to feel sad, because you're still kind of grieved because you've lost your previous life, right? And even for many of us dealing with tick-borne illnesses, your whole personality changes.
Yeah.
And so I often grieve for the old me that used to be really cheerful and happy, because now, I sort of joke, I run a local Lyme support group, and sometimes we joke and go, yeah, Lyme just makes you into this grumpy old person, like, but it's also part of why humor and connecting with other Lyme patients is really important, because then we just try to laugh our way through it,
Yeah.
right? But it's hard because there is a certain level of, sort of acceptance. The other thing that's really interesting too, and it's funny how you look at sort of how medicine changes, but also like social acceptance. So I have a medical prescription for cannabis, and I primarily use CBD because I find it's a really good anti-inflammatory. It helps with the joint pain. The big thing is it helps me with sleep, because especially with the babesia, it is horrible on, causing insomnia. And so I found that CBD has been a game changer for me for sleep and for general inflammation. I don't generally like the effects of THC. I don't like that high feeling. So I usually only take a little bit before bed, but I find it really helps. So that's been great that now society and, our governments are recognizing that, actually these are safe things.
Yeah.
The next thing that I want to see our governments come online with is psilocybin. I think there is so much potential in psilocybin as a treatment. There's plenty of science that shows for PTSD, for treatment-resistant depression. What got me interested in looking at psilocybin is the fact that there's scientific evidence that suggests that it can help with autoimmune diseases, which is basically what chronic tick-borne illnesses are, right? They're chronic autoimmune diseases. And so I would love to see our governments realize that these are not addictive substances, that they should not be Schedule I, and that they should do exactly what they've done with cannabis, which is, sure, regulate it, but make it available in a medicinal way for people. Because I think there's, at least the science that I'm reading suggests that there's a lot of benefits to be drawn from psilocybin, and we just need for it to become legalized now.
I agree that psilocybin is something that is exciting and on the horizon in the Lyme community, and to tie together two of the loops that you and Aimee were developing together is, neural retraining is a vital part of a healing journey. I'd argue to Matt on many occasions that it's actually 80% neural or emotional retraining and only 20% physiological. And
I agree. Yeah.
we've had that debate back and forth on many occasions. But one of the challenges that we have with neural retraining is that when you begin that process too early, it feels overwhelming. I've had many folks tell me, I was so sick, there's no way I could have done something else, right?
Right.
So so I think what may sort of fill that gap sort of as an early treatment is psilocybin.
Right.
Because I think if we were using psilocybin and having that neural retraining occur as a result of using the psilocybin, along with some of the treatment protocols that you're using to deal with the infection, you may have the dual benefit. But of course, there's got to, we're going to have to do that research, and the good news is that we've shared with our community on a number of occasions is there are many experts in the Lyme community that are looking at these psychedelics.
Mhm.
And major universities have been funded with studies, including Johns Hopkins and Harvard and Yale, with here in the U.S. with research dollars for the psychedelics. So it is something we should keep an eye on. It's something we should be prepared to use, and we're going
to advocate, right? So
Sure.
if you have a voice, whether it's government or medical community or whatever, but if there's ways to to advocate for for psilocybin to be accepted as a medical treatment, if those opportunities exist to advocate, go for it. Help to push, right?
Yeah, and it is important to understand that at least from the standpoint of what we've seen here at Tick Boot Camp, is there really is a pattern to healing, at least people who are successfully healing, right? And there is this process of a prehabilitation where you have to prepare yourself physically and emotionally for this healing journey, and perhaps that's a stage where we begin to deal with the neural retraining elements of that healing journey. That we go through a process of aiding our body, aiding our immune system with killing the bugs. And I think you did a beautiful job, the two of you, with describing the importance of getting your immune system the aid it needs and not just killing everything, because it really is the immune system that wins the day. We then have to go through a process of rehabilitation, right? And that rehabilitation process is one where we can then maybe spend more time doing more hardcore neural retraining, so that we no longer have the brain that we needed to have in order to be able to get us through this battle of illness. And then, of course, we have to get to a stage where we're maintaining all the gains that we've made, and we have in our toolbox the tools we need to prevent ourselves from having the relapses that are a part of the journey. And again, Dr. Ball, you've done a beautiful job of sharing with us how you've had to deal with this maintenance element of healing, right? So we actually call that our PARM or Parmesan, framework, where we have these traditional steps, and the two of you really did a beautiful job of outlining that part of the journey. So now let's go to the beautiful elements of Lyme, because we do have to connect with our folks and acknowledge that it sucks to go through a Lyme disease journey. It really does suck, and it's not something that anyone would want to do. But then, of course, it's not something you would give up either, because there are so many beautiful elements to this journey, and it is really powerful to strip away all of these things that our culture and our educational system and our government system put on us, and become a pure version of ourselves. It's really powerful to understand who we are and what our God-given gifts are and what our purpose is in life. And when you go through a Lyme disease journey, you are put in a position where you learn all of that in a way that you wouldn't otherwise. So, Dr. Ball, you have written a book, and in this book, you are trying to give folks an outline of many of the things that you've learned, so that they would not have to go on this journey. So, talk to us about how this journey has been transformational for you, how you've learned more about who you are and what God-given gifts you have, and how you are now going to serve the world differently than you would have had you not gone on a Lyme disease journey.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, Rich, and I think you've nailed it, because I think it is something that we all go through on this journey. To begin with, I wouldn't wish this on anybody. It's been horrendous in so many ways, but I am very much the kind of person who says, okay, this is a crappy situation. I think, as Aimee said, we didn't ask for this, and we didn't do anything intentionally to get here. It's just, it happened to us, and it is what it is, right? And so then I think the challenge becomes, okay, well, what are you going to do with this? And so, people say to me, well, how on earth did you write a book when you were so sick with Lyme? And I said, I think it's just a combination of pure determination. I'm stubborn as anything. And I think a huge desire to take a really crappy situation and try to extract something good from it. And part of that for me was to say, I was denied treatment by our public healthcare system. I had to go to the science and actually read the peer-reviewed science to understand these diseases and how to treat them. I'm fortunate, I'm very privileged to have a science background. How can I use that science background, take that information and distill it into a way that I could share it with somebody else and it would help them? And so, I'd started to kind of think about this, and I thought, geez, it'd be really cool to write a book. And if I wrote a book, I'd write it in a way that my mother could have understood it, right? And then hilariously, I just out of the blue hear from Firefly Books, the publishing company. And like, how'd you like to write a book about Lyme disease? I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, did somehow the universe kind of, answer sort of this thought that I had? And so that's what we did. So I worked with a publisher on this. They were wonderful about it. And I really did write it from the perspective of wanting it to be like a primer of Lyme disease and tick-borne illnesses. So it lacks details that other books I think are better at in terms of like treatment. Like I don't go into a ton on treatment because I think Bill Rawls' books and some of the others do a really great job, and you can write an entire book about treatment. What I wanted to do was to kind of give people sort of a bit more to like the 30,000 foot altitude view of Lyme and tick-borne diseases. So what are they? They're, bacterial diseases, and in the case of Babesia, it's not a bacterial disease. You can't treat it with antibiotics, right? So for people to understand, what these things are that they may be battling, what are some of the, how do you test for it? What do you do if you're bitten? How do we prevent a bite, or how do we at least, minimize the chance of a bite? Those were the sorts of things that I really wanted to focus on, which is to say, how do we get outside, enjoy nature, enjoy the outdoors, that minimize our chance of a bite? Okay, so we've got a chapter on that. What do you do if you're bitten? And then, okay, here's my recommendations about what to do if you're bitten. Get the tick tested. Do your best to try to get antibiotics. And if you can't get antibiotics, at least get onto antimicrobial herbals with a naturopath. What about the testing? Is there any testing that's good? Well, we know that the testing, the two-tier testing, at least that public health here in Canada uses, is horrendous. And if you actually have Lyme disease, the probability that those tests will pick it up is about 50%. It's a coin toss. It's useless. What I basically say to people is that a positive Lyme test tells you something, a negative test tells you nothing. A negative Lyme test says either you don't have Lyme or the test failed to detect it, and you have no way of telling the difference between those two, right? So I kind of wanted to educate people about the testing, because I don't know about you guys, but in this country, there's way too much emphasis on the blood testing, the two-tier testing. And I have to throw this in here because this really kind of drives me bonkers. Health Canada, so our federal government here, in 2012 had actually published a bulletin in I think it's called the Adverse Reactions Bulletin. It's a bulletin for medical doctors in Canada. Keep in mind, this is back in October of 2012. They actually published a section on Lyme disease and the two-tier testing in Canada. And that bulletin, written by Health Canada to medical doctors in Canada, says, rely on a clinical diagnosis. Do not use the two-tier blood test to make a diagnosis. Use it as a supportive test because it lacks sensitivity. But what's happened in this country? You go to a GP, and the first thing that they do is a blood test. And if it's negative, they say, you don't have Lyme, and I'm not giving you any antibiotics. And so I'm starting to actually print this thing out and hand it to people and say, take it to your GP. Show them that our own government has said, don't use the blood test for diagnosis. Because the other part that we have here, and I don't know if you guys have the same issue in the US, is like I spent $2,500 to get my blood tested with Armin Labs in Germany. You can get blood tests at IGeneX. They're both great labs, right? But the problem is that our medical professionals in this country have basically, I don't know if they've formally been told or not, but it's kind of like the 6 weeks of antibiotics. They will not accept those tests. So if you test under, the two-tier testing under public health, which is a test that's horrible, and you test negative, and yet you test at IGeneX and it's positive, they'll ignore the test. They'll say, I can't even accept those test results.
So, Dr. Ball, let's stay with your book a little bit more. And I don't know that we even gave the community the title of the book. So it's Lyme Disease, Ticks, and You. So talk to us about what inspired you to name your book Lyme Disease, Ticks, and You.
Yeah, it's so it is about Lyme disease, but it's also about other tick-borne illnesses. So the title is kind of the second part of the title is a guide to navigating tick bites, Lyme disease, and other tick-borne infections. And so I wanted, as I say, I wanted this book to be kind of a primer of tick-borne diseases to help people. At the same time, I wanted it, we sort of wanted a title that was a little bit more something that would interest the general public, as opposed to something that sounded very like scientific and technical. Because I've done my best to write the book so that people with zero scientific background could understand it. As I say, I tried to write it so that my mother could have understood.
And that's important, right? Because one of the things that we understand here, and we've talked about a little bit earlier, and which is why I think you were uniquely positioned to write this book, which is it's important that we have a relationship with nature. It's important that we get outside, and it's important certainly during the prehab phases of our healing journey, but I think during every phase of our healing journey, to be outside and to connect with nature, right? And that was something that you did from the day that you were born, or certainly the day you were mobile when you turned 2 years old, right? You also had a passion for photography. You also have advanced degrees in biology. And you brought together all of your education, all of your experiences, and all of your various passions, and you brought it to a book that was written both for people who have Lyme disease and people who will hopefully avoid Lyme disease, right? And you are uniquely positioned to do that because of all of the experiences that you had and all of the gifts that God had given you up until the time that you had gotten sick. So talk to us a little bit more about how you wrote this in a way that would encourage people to continue to have a healthy relationship with nature, but also to be safe in nature, something you were not, without necessarily having to be a scientist. Because I think what has a lot of people concerned about keeping themselves healthy is that they're not scientists and they don't have scientific aptitude, yet they really don't need that in order to protect themselves from being exposed to Lyme disease. And you've taught them how to do that in this book.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important point, Rich, is that you don't have to be a scientist to prevent a tick bite or to even sort of navigate, Lyme disease and these tick-borne illnesses. It's really about identifying some key steps that we can take that can minimize our risk of a bite, build some awareness. It's like even here in Eastern Ontario, I treat my dogs 12 months of the year for, with the tick preventative. Sure, it can go down to minus 30, 35 degrees Celsius here, but we can also go up to say plus 10 in February in the wintertime. So you can be walking in the forest on a day where temperatures are above freezing and you can still get a tick bite in the winter.
Absolutely.
So I want people to understand these things so that part of it too is it's filling a gap, because, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but the public generally looks to our medical system for guidance and information. But when it comes to tick-borne diseases, all the information that they're giving out is wrong. And people
it's because
are getting harmed as a result. And so I wanted this book to kind of fill that gap, to say, I want you to have some basic knowledge so you can go out in nature, have fun, do it safely. And if unfortunately you are bitten, here are the steps that you can take to hopefully avoid what I've had to deal with.
So one of the things I thought was beautiful about the interaction between you and Aimee is that I guess the upside and the downside to recognizing that doctors are not all-knowing is that it's sad, as you had pointed out, that that this pedestal that we were all raised culturally to worship these people at, it does crumble, and it is painful when you lose faith in people that you thought had all the information. But at the same time, it's empowering, because it puts us in a position where we can respond with ability. We can learn what we need to learn to keep ourselves safe and keep our children safe and keep our community safe. And it's a book like Lyme Disease, Ticks, and You, which can put folks in a position where, in a very short book, without any scientific jargon, you can be in a position where you can keep yourself safe, You can learn from the real experts, the Aimees and the Dr. Balls, who are the people who've been on the journey and who are the real experts, not the doctors
Right.
in the medical community, but the real experts who are now putting out materials, podcasts like this and books like yours that will allow people to be safe from Lyme disease.
Exactly. And you know, the other part of it too, and I never kind of really anticipated this when I wrote the book, but I've also found that it's kind of brought me together with not just the Lyme community, but, you know, so people suffering from Lyme, but people who are affected by Lyme, even, you know, say a family member who's sick or something. I mean, the number of people in the past 5 years who have contacted me and said, oh my goodness, I have a tick bite, what do I do? Or I've got a bullseye, what do I do? Or I was bitten and now I'm sick, how do I deal with this? You know, and I'm not a medical doctor, I don't give it medical advice, but I can say, here's what I have done, here's what I've read. And that's kind of what, you know, the purpose of the book is. But the other kind of advantage, I guess, of writing this book that has connected me with the Lyme community is that I'm just in the process of starting up a Lyme advocacy group. And we're just informal, but I think one of the things that has really, you know, really kind of been, I guess, kind of a burr under the saddle for me with this whole Lyme and tick-borne disease journey is the prevalence of double standards. So, you know, when we were talking about doxycycline and how we're pretty much limited to 6 weeks of doxycycline, that it's the elephant in the room. You know, no, I don't think any GP will tell you, oh, I'm not allowed to give you any more than 6 weeks, otherwise my medical license will be revoked or something like that. It is the elephant in the room. But here's what really bothers me, at least in this country, your GP can actually give out, I believe it's up to 4 or 6 months of doxycycline, months, not weeks, of doxycycline to treat severe acne in a teen. So to clear that teen's acne so that they can go to their graduation without, you know, a terrible complexion, they're allowed to get 4 months of doxycycline, the same antibiotic that we use for treating Lyme disease. And yet we're cut off at 6 weeks of that same antibiotic. And yet it could cost us our life if we don't have access to it. And so it's the injustices. There's so many double standards. And I think the other part that I have become more, not just interested in, but I think more vocal about, and something that I'm going to be pursuing, is if you really stop and think about it, the way that Lyme and tick-borne diseases are treated, or actually not treated by our mainstream medical system, it's a human rights issue. This is about preventing access to medical care for people based on the disease that they have. And, you know, I'm not trying to be overly dramatic here, but where have we seen this before? HIV/AIDS in the 1980s, where a group of citizens were cut off from medical treatment or denied even a diagnosis, you know, based on kind of who they were. And you know, I'm not trying to say that, you know, we're kind of in the same space and the same severity necessarily as HIV/AIDS patients were then, because it's, you know, I hate to say it, but sometimes I think Lyme disease and tick-borne illnesses are kind of more like death by 1,000 cuts because of the chronic nature of it. But it's a human rights issue. And I think that's an angle of this whole story that has not been talked about enough. And I think those of us who are advocates need to start getting busy to really start challenging the system from the human rights perspective.
And I think a good place to start will be with your book, right? To give folks the foundation that they need in a non-scientific fashion, where they can begin to advocate for themselves, to demand that they receive the basic human rights that every human being is entitled to, and to come up with a treatment protocol that will work for them, right? Because there are just so many diverse presentations of this disease with we have a diverse set of people who are bio individuals who are harboring a different set of microbes before they come in contact with the microbes from a tick bite, and then have a variety of different microbes spit into them, 19 of which have been identified, but up to 200 can be in each individual tick. And it does create a very diverse set of presentations in each individual. And we have the right to receive the care we deserve so that we can come up with the individual treatment treatment plan that will allow us to get better. So I
Exactly.
think that's,
I think you just kind of really nailed it, Rich, was, it's sort of the purpose of the book was to help people advocate for themselves, because that's what we've got to do, right? That's kind of the bottom line.
to avoid getting sick if they have the proper tools to avoid coming in contact with ticks, to check themselves, to remove the tick properly, and then to get early intervention. And if that doesn't work, well, then there are other steps that you can take to deal with your illness if it does pivot over from an acute phase to a chronic phase. So I think you've done it brilliantly, and I think the book is a must read for folks in our community. So again, Lyme Disease, Ticks and You by Dr. Shelley Ball. Can you talk to folks about where they can get this book if they're interested in following up and reading the book after listening to this podcast?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. So certainly it is available on Amazon. People can order it online that way here in Canada through Indigo Books as well. Yeah, and I think even just going to your local bookstore, just asking them to order it in is also another possibility. And yeah, easily accessible. And really appreciate you, having me on to talk about this. It's an important topic, and I think the bottom line is we just those of us who have been through this want to help other people.
So now we get to the point in the podcast where we ask the final question, and my good friend Aimee, as my guest co-host, gets to make the decision about what the final question will be.
Okay, so I've thought long and hard about this over the past 2 hours, and it's not a typical question. I'm so sorry, Rich. I'm not going to ask the normal question. It's kind of a question for me that I want to know, and I also know to help a lot of other people. I remember a few months ago, I was talking to my husband, and I was talking about how much easier it was to be sick when I was a teenager opposed to now, because when I was in high school, my only job was getting better. But now as an adult, it's not my only job. I have a regular job. I have to take care of my family. I take care of my daughter. Like, getting better is not my only job. So what encouragement would you give to other adults going through this when getting better is not their only job, but it's probably the most important one? What encouragement would you give to them when they're juggling these jobs?
Yeah. Boy, you sure have nailed it. Because we have to live. We have to get on with our lives, right? I think something that's really important is to be kind to ourselves and not beat ourselves up. We're going to have days where we feel awful.
Yeah.
And we have to acknowledge that. And I think we have to be empathetic to ourselves in a sense, to acknowledge that we feel crappy. And it's okay to feel crappy, and it's okay to feel sorry for ourselves sometimes, and, to be a little bit depressed. But that, I think, as you said, we've got so many responsibilities in life, and that we've got to, find that way to keep moving forward, and to pick ourselves up and dust ourselves off, and to maintain optimism, to know that it's hard because treatment for tick-borne diseases is so individual, right? What works for me may not work for you. So just because you try something that doesn't work doesn't mean there aren't other tools for you to use. And to also realize, we've got new research coming, that's going to offer, new tools for treatment and that sort of thing as well. So I think it's just being kind to yourself, cutting yourself some slack when you need to, but at the same time, staying optimistic and focusing on some positive things. I'm not big on toxic positivity, but yeah. At the same time, I think there's absolutely a necessity for looking forward to the future, and building things into your life that you will look forward to, and spending time with your family, booking that family trip. Don't ever think that those things aren't ever possible again. Say if you were a big traveler before, and then you got sick, and you just feel like you can't do it. You will get there. And I think we just have to stay optimistic and be kind to ourselves too.
That is a perfect way to end this podcast, with a perfect question, Aimee. It was certainly much better than the question I would have asked. So thank you both for spending so much time with us here at Tick Boot Camp, and thank you for sharing your journeys with the folks who are a part of our community.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I just want to say how much I absolutely love what you guys do, and I'm so grateful for it.